Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is Venus Unplugged. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and this is your virtual Heartbreak Hotel. So what we're doing here is all things Venusian. The shadow, the light, beauty, possibilities, and now we're working on fairy tales. We are going to complete the tale of Snow White, which actually I didn't think it would take this long, but I'm glad it did, and it continues because of its depth. And here we are at spring. We're in Holy Week, and Snow White has fallen out of the glass coffin and spit out the poisonous apple. And in this particular fairy tale, the prince doesn't kiss her. There's no magical kiss. All he does is pay the dwarfs to take her coffin back, and it's through an accident. It's interesting because usually in this case, Snow White is the heroine. She's the one who has to do all the work because she's the one that's individuating. And with all fairy tales, they tell the story of one person. Everything in this story of Snow White is aspects of yourself. So keep that in mind, including the witch. So this fairy tale, the prince is there, and that is her beloved. And the one thing that he does do is he claims her. He says, "You are mine," which very often is what happens, sometimes subtly or in a dream. We're not always so clearly aware that the positive animus has been teased out of the chaos of psyche, and suddenly he's there. It's this new voice that's really your champion. The negative animus, which is the male aspect of a woman, works on behalf of the witch and tells her that she's ugly, or she's fat, or she's terrible, or she'll never be able, she's not lovable. But the positive animus says, yes, you are. You are lovable. You are worthwhile. You are mine. You don't have to be anything. You're mine. You belong to me. I want you. And I want to be whole, which is what this fairy tale is all about, is becoming whole. So with this, now with the Walt Disney fairy tales, of course, the witch, she's never heard of. But back at the castle, and I think I read this last week as the last, but I'm going to read it again. We're talking about the stepmother, who is the shadow of Snow White. See, without any opposite, there will be no growth. So it's dangerous to be one-sided. I only want the good. Well, you're asking for it by only wanting the good. Instead of saying whatever it is that needs to happen that is going to force my growth, I say yes to that. Because you know that you have the strength. And if you don't have the strength this time, you have the strength the next time. The experience happens. People, why does this always happen to me? You haven't integrated the experience. You keep on rejecting it instead of entering into it. And in a strange place, Snow White enters into this tension of the opposites, or this encounter with evil, or in this case, the negative aspect of the shadow. The shadow can have a golden side too. And in order to love, truly love, we need to be able to see shadow and light. And we can't really judge it because we don't really understand it. Just because it doesn't feel good, that doesn't mean that it's not for our greater good. So here we have it. So I'm reading here from the Grimm's fairy tale, but Snow White's godless stepmother was also invited to the feast. And when she had dressed herself in beautiful clothes, she stepped before the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror, here I stand. Who's the fairest in the land?" Bless her cotton socks, this woman doesn't give up. And the mirror answers, "Here, O queen, you are most fair, but the young queen is 1,000-fold beyond compare." Then the evil woman uttered a curse, and she became so terrified she didn't know what to do. Now, there's even a change in evil stepmother. Finally, she catches on. Like, whoa, this could cause a lot of heartache. So there is a break in her narcissistic possession, and she begins to realize, not in any big way, but enough that it's not cool. And that Snow White has grown into the beauty that she fears, but yet it is true. It's right. It must be this way. And so the fairy tale says nothing about, what was happening, meanwhile, with the queen. But if we look back, once again, over Snow White's past, we recognize that Snow White, too, has an inclination to fall into temptations of prey. And when she went 3 times. Usually in fairy tales, 3 is a significant number. You get 3 tests. You're warned 3 times. Very often you're warned in exactly the same words. A dream will come that's almost exactly the same. You hear it from 3 people. It's all fairy tale talk. I have it in sessions, too, and someone would say, I can't believe you just said that. Somebody said something like that, almost the same exact thing, yesterday. And I said, well, on the 3rd time, you better really listen, because otherwise you're asking for it. In our invisible world, which is the real world, that's the world that's connected to the divine, we're always warned. A funny feeling. Remember the birds? The birds came and gave her Snow White information while she was unconscious, while she was in her own little individual Holy Week, her own transformation. So these developments, when Snow White was unconscious and in a death sleep, there was a process going on because she comes out different. She doesn't come out of the coffin. She doesn't fall out of the coffin. How graceful could that be? She doesn't come out the same way. She comes out with a different wisdom. So in these fairy tales, we need to look at, and we need to be careful, what's our conventional traditions? And, generally we don't want anything negative. Oh, don't tell me anything negative. Well, it's not negative. It's just part of the storyline. It brings up an opposite. So instead of being opinionated or judgmental about it, ask yourself, so what is the opposite that's trying to come into my life to awaken me, to get this poison apple out of my throat, to be able to speak authentically about you? That is your absolute right. Speak authentically, or having authority, or one's sovereignty, being self-ruled about yourself. Not about anybody else. You don't have it for anybody else. But you do have it to the best of your ability of what you know about yourself today. And in being able to state that, you'll also get a hint into the next coming events of your life. So in this case, we're looking at the queen, and she doesn't really make any changes. A little bit. She gets frightened, so at least that's a hint. But she remains as she is. She utters a curse, and then she gets so terrified. So that the terrified, she didn't know what to do. And perhaps she, for once, feels some weakness. Is there a crack in her armor? I wonder if she gave the mirror to Snow White. I don't know. I don't think so. I guess everybody has their own mirror. So this is very important to understand. Blessings and curses are two tremendously important forms of transmitting supernatural power, either for good or for ill. And we all do it. We have power, and we don't know how it's going to work or how it's going to unfold. So your words are your powers. They're cursings and they're blessings. So the Queen's curse means that every step in development, every phase, you are with me. She's achieved, so, that Snow White has achieved through great labor, and the labors were in her supposed mistakes. Now, very often in families, we never quite leave the family house. People will go back on the holidays, or, when they don't really want to, or they will, they feel so bad because their parents are getting older and they really should do something, or they're, they're afraid that the mother will cry if the son doesn't come to visit, all of these things. Now, of course, we want to be kind and loving to our family, but not always at the cost of every other relationship. I find it interesting, people are so often so loyal to the cruelest member of their family. It's not out of love, it's out of fear. And a simple no will do. No, I'm not going to stand before the cruel person. No, I am not going to do your bidding. No, I will not offend my heart and my soul to please your narcissism. That is a stand that we all have to make at some point to mature. Because without that conscious separation from this evil stepmother within or without, there will be no growth. And that's huge. And it takes a lot of awareness to know when that is the right time to do that. But if we're kowtowing, or if we're giving up our sense of self or our new own consciousness to go into or to please someone who hasn't a clue on who you are, that's high self-treason. Terrible thing to do to your heart and to your soul. So think about that. Very often the person that we fear the most, we just won't make that step. Instead of saying, like Cornelia and King Lear, she says, I will, to the king, her father, she says, I love you as a daughter should. Now, of course, she paid dearly for that wisdom because, he sent her off to France to marry some rascal. But in the end of the play, he realizes that she is correct. What she is saying, I love you in right relationship. And that is the true love. Where her two sisters, little warped ones, they just just, no, Father dearest, you're the king, you're this. Meanwhile, they're the ones that did him in. So we need that little inner part of ourselves that says, I love you as a daughter or a son should in right relationship. I'm not giving up my life. And that's it. In balance. So the queen's anxiety is probably the last stand of her intuition. Okay, so she's kind of like, oh, Jesus, here it goes, all right? Well, they probably didn't even know about Jesus then. So what we're looking at here is that we need a germ of evil. We always do. Not only does it bring forth the plot, remember, evil is live spelled backwards. It's going to hint at where the issue is, where the problem is. Now, what's very interesting is the next. All right, and of course, in Disney World or most fairy tales, we don't really know what the true ending is. But in this ending, it's Snow White. So what happens? The queen is invited to the feast, the wedding feast, and then she had to step into red-hot shoes and dance until she fell dead to the floor. That's right. That's the ending of that one. She wore the stepmother wore red-hot shoes and danced until she fell into the floor. What does this mean? Well, in the fairy tales, things are always balancing out. There's no judgment, there's no opinion, all right? So we need to look at, same thing within life. It's dangerous for that happy ever after. And it's a setup, it's never going to happen. And the happy ending is the integration, and then we start at another level. So what this talks about is that the archetypal darkness in the form of the evil stepmother is not banished from the kingdom in the tale's end. It's, at the wedding in the Grimm's version, the witch is not allowed to disappear into the woods, but is forced to the wedding to dance to her death in red-hot iron shoes. This persecution, this figure of persecution dies a cruel death, which means her narcissistic standpoint towards reality is cruelly broken up. Her death initiates a process which Snow White is to integrate and bear both the negative and positive poles of the archetypal feminine, which is very interesting imagery. I don't know if you've ever heard of they're called sin eaters or shadow eaters, and they're shamans who actually eat the sins and the sufferings of others. But that's not the case here. Okay, so iron is the metal not sacred to the great goddess, which is very important to understand. So this says it's the connotation of punishment, it's cruelty, and it's bondage. And shoes, on the other hand, symbolize fertility and vulva and life. And dancing to death in shoes of iron is a very paradoxical way to die. And paradox is at the nature of the center of us, the self with a capital S. Paradox is at the center of the self, which is why we need shadow and light. We're never going to get to the self without it. So this Dark Queen's death is important for all of us to understand. And that Snow White, or the Snow White within you, all right, it needs to also be able to make another suffer. Now, I'm not suggesting cruelty. One way we can make envy suffer is by not giving in to it, not serving it. Not serving the narcissistic person or the envious person. We make them suffer, but we have to have enough of a healthy ego to say, yes, this, if I do not do your bidding, you will suffer. So what? Suffer. I'm not here to do your bidding. I'm here to become whole. I'm here to be true to the divine. There was this one example. I was on a line. It was New York City. You know, New York City and our lines. We take no hostages when it comes to a line. Don't ever dare jump in front of a line unless you want somebody right in your face. But at any rate, so I was on the line at the grocery store, whatever, and there was a woman behind me, and she had, maybe I had 10 things, and she had 2 things. So she got it into her head that I was to serve her and to get ahead of me. And which normally I would do, but she was so nasty. It's like, I ain't serving this bitch. So I turned around and I looked at her in my haughtiest of looks. Oh, and those blue eyes cast upon that side glance. And I said to her, Madam, I only serve one God, and it's not you. Now, of course, the lady at the cash register was hilarious. She went like, oh, who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out? So we were going to have this bitch fight, and she just backed off. And that was my truth. No, I will not serve your narcissism, not even for a moment. I haven't worked this hard of consciousness of shadow and light. And if I'm going to be a bitch, I am a conscious bitch. I know what I'm doing. It's not a mistake. It's a choice. And that's very freeing when we can live in that, because there are times when only the shadow will do. Most of the time, the love will be fine. But every once in a while, you got to growl. Not as a way of life, but that you have that capacity. Which is also why the archetypal feminine is a symbol of the cat. Because the cat can be very, purry and loving and everything, but suddenly it will show its nails. And it means it. We'll give you a warning, usually. So we can give people warnings. See, if you're standing on your sacred ground, which is anywhere where you're standing, because anywhere where you're standing is where the divine is. We can never be outside of the divine. Ever. And when you're standing in that, and you're rooted in that, and the self, with a big S, capital S, is related to, both through your shadow and light and the paradoxes of life, you can stand in your truth. Just state it. It doesn't have to be an argument. Just state it. No, I won't be doing that. No is a very powerful magic wand. If we could just stick to no. The second we start explaining our no, each word take a year, and we wind up being 3 years old. And women have this in particular. They need to say no, because that is right relationship to who they are with themselves. They will explain too much of why the no is a no. No. Sometimes I say no just to say no because I want to see what somebody's thinking, because they've already got, they've already sold, in their heads, it's already going to be a yes to whatever their request is. And then when I say no, suddenly it's like, well, how could you say no? It's like, well, didn't you know that was a possibility? Because if someone doesn't realize that you can say no and it's a complete sentence, you don't exist. You're just a pawn for their narcissistic fantasy. oh, this person loves me and they'll always do that. Well, not always. And that's kind of fun when you just say no, especially when somebody thinks that you're going to say yes, just to watch the performance piece, the sales pitch, or out and out they get angry. How could you say no? Well, it's one letter shorter than yes. And if we can stand in our own authenticity, in our own sovereignty, and just watch it, no reaction, nothing to get angry about. The person just convinced themselves that you were the right person to carry their load or be their scapegoat or whatever that might be. And you say no. And when it's a big no deep within, you'll just walk away. You'll see it for what it is, and you'll walk away to your own wholeness. So this is part of what Snow White was teaching all of us. All this journey, all these things that she went through, all the people, all aspects of our own journey to wholeness. So when the evil queen dances to death, what that means is that Snow White has to ingest that. That's an alchemical image where it burns. It's the putrefactio. We're purified and we burn. So what happens to that? All right. We then ingest it. We take it back for another level, another integration, or as we know in our lives, something is solved, resolved, we mature. And, a lot of times people don't realize things happen to their lives because 10 other people are going to come into their lives at some other point that need them to have witnessed or experienced something to help them through. So when things happen in our lives, it's not always your deal. It's because you have agreed or you are allotted to learn or mature, so that the person that comes along that doesn't have a mentor, okay, or doesn't have a chance or can't even imagine what this could be, you can share that with them. So here she goes, 90 seconds. Okay, we have to end. So next week, I think we're going to work on fairy tales a little more, but I think I will explain the kind of the fairy tale code. And what I was thinking is leaving you with a question, a heart question. And that would be, what are the things your heart would have you stop doing right now? If you had a conversation with your heart and you're explaining, okay, well, I'm all stressed out about this. Now, stress is when we're living in bad faith with time, all right? And the heart would then say, if we would really listen, well, let's eliminate this. Instead of looking at the ugly or the burdensome, why don't we go look at beauty? Why don't we imagine beauty? Not glamour, but beauty. So reveal to your heart how capable you are of maintaining and perceiving beauty. And we'll talk next week. Have a glorious, glorious Holy Week. Bye.